When I first held Liam in my arms, he was barely 6 pounds of warmth and wide, blinking eyes, a tiny being swaddled in uncertainty. I was only 16, trembling with the weight of grief and fear, my own hands still childish but now responsible for something infinitely precious. Our mother had died during his birth, and our father, already a shadow in our lives, vanished into silence within days of the funeral. It was as if he couldn't bear the smell of diapers or the memory of the woman he'd once loved. Just like that, we were alone. Liam, barely breathing in his crib, and me, clutching a baby bottle with shaking fingers in the dim light of a too-quiet kitchen. The court tried to take him away, of course. They said I was too young. They said I needed a guardian myself. But I fought. I studied parenting books while others prepared for prom. I sat through hearings with swollen eyes from sleepless nights, speaking through tears to caseworkers and judges, begging them to let me keep him. In the end, an aunt no one liked wrote a letter saying I had always been the most mature of the cousins, and that maybe, just maybe, I could do it. So they let me try. Temporary custody at first, conditional, supervised. I dropped out of school. Took 2 part-time jobs, cashier at a corner store by day, janitor at a school by night. I slept in 2-hour stretches between feedings, cradling Liam against my chest as I rocked him and hummed lullabies I remembered from when Mom used to sing to me. He'd fall asleep against my heartbeat, and I'd stay awake watching his tiny chest rise and fall, as if afraid that if I stopped staring, he might disappear like the rest of our family. Time passed, and we became a pair known around the neighborhood, the girl with the baby strapped to her back while sweeping the porch, the toddler giggling in the laundry cart, the brother who clung to my leg when strangers approached. I was mother, sister, protector, and sometimes even playmate when his smile made the exhaustion worth it. I made sure his birthdays had cake, even if it meant skipping meals the week before. I pretended Santa had visited each Christmas, wrapping dollar store toys and newspaper comics, and placing them carefully under a plastic tree I'd found abandoned behind a store. Liam grew. He called me Sis with love, never knowing the sacrifices behind the pancakes or the worn shoes I repaired with glue. I shielded him from the truth about our father. I kept photos of Mom in every room so he'd never forget the face of the woman, who had loved him even from the grave. When he had nightmares, I'd sit beside him all night, stroking his hair, whispering promises that everything would be okay. And it always was, because I made sure of it. When he turned 8, I re-enrolled, in school through night classes, balancing homework with his. He'd sit beside me at the kitchen table, crayons scattered across his math book, while I read about algebra and biology. When I graduated with my GED, he clapped the loudest, wearing a paper cap we made together. Every time I thought of quitting, I looked at him and remembered who I was doing it for. We had dreams, him and me. He wanted to be an architect. I wanted him to get there. I got a job at a law firm as a receptionist, then worked my way up to a paralegal. Steady hours. Better. Hey, I started saving. Not just for the rent or food, but for college. For his future. Every birthday, he had a little envelope with a few more dollars in it. A tradition he thought was just fun. But I knew it was a tiny piece of freedom I was building brick by brick. He was bright, charming, kind. People adored him. Teachers called him gifted. Friends' parents asked how I raised such a good boy. I smiled, never saying that I cried into my pillow some nights wondering if I was doing anything right. Never admitting how lonely it was, how the weight of being everything for someone made your spine ache in places no massage could reach. When Liam got his acceptance letter to Columbia, I cried for an hour straight. He hugged me so tight I thought I'd break. "We did it, sis," he whispered. "We really did it." He didn't know I'd worked weekends for a year to help pay for his application fees. He didn't know I'd skipped my own medical appointments so I could afford the extra tutoring he needed for math. He didn't know, and I never told him. That was the point. That was love. The next few years were strange, quiet. The apartment echoed without his laughter. I sent care packages monthly, stuffed with snacks and notes and little things he liked. I'd get short calls between his classes, quick texts with photos of the campus. "Doing great," he'd write. "Don't worry about me." I still did. I always would. And when he came home after graduation, taller, sharper, a man now, I looked at him with pride so deep it left me breathless. He hugged me and said I was still his hero, that I'd given him everything. I laughed and told him all I'd ever wanted was to see him happy. What I didn't know was that the story was already changing quietly like a crack forming under wallpaper, a line of betrayal buried beneath years of love. I started to notice small things at first. His silences when we talked about the future, the way his eyes shifted when I mentioned our mother's house, the one I'd fought so hard to keep from being sold after she died. It had sat empty for years, a hollow shell of memories and dust, but it was still ours. I thought maybe he just didn't want to talk about it. Maybe it brought up too much emotion. I never imagined it was something darker. I never imagined he had already made plans. It was a letter that cracked everything open, official and cold, the kind of envelope that made your breath catch in your throat before you even opened it. Inside was paperwork about the estate, our mother's, which had finally come out of probate. Legalese I could read too well after years working in law, sentences that bit like snakes. The property at 1 and 12 Greenwood Lane is to be transferred to sole ownership of Liam Charles Whitaker. I reread the line 10 times. My name was nowhere, no shared title, no mention of guardianship, of sacrifice, of the girl who became a mother before she ever got to be a child. I called him. My hands shook dialing the number. He answered casually, voice warm as if nothing had changed. I asked him about the letter. There was a long pause and then a sigh, drawn out and exhausted like I had burdened him. I just thought, he said slowly, that maybe it was time for me to have something of my own. His own. The words struck me like a slap. I reminded him I raised him, that everything he had was because I gave it up, that I never asked for thanks, just fairness. It's not like that, he murmured, almost apologetic. You don't need the house. You've got your job, your life. I thought this would be easier, as if watching him erase me from the very legacy I preserved was supposed to be easy. I hung up and sat on the floor, knees pulled to my chest, eyes wide with a hollowness I hadn't felt since the day our father disappeared. All those nights, nursing him through fevers. The time I sold my laptop so he could buy art supplies for school. Every scraped knee I patched, every bully I confronted, every birthday I made magical even when we couldn't afford power the next week. All of it, swept aside like a story he no longer needed. Still, I told myself he'd change his mind. I told myself he was overwhelmed, confused. Maybe someone had advised him poorly. Maybe a friend or a mentor told him to think about his own future. I clung to that belief like it was a life raft. Because if it wasn't confusion, if it wasn't a mistake, then it was betrayal. A week later, I got the final notice. The transfer had gone through. He was the sole owner. There was no letter, no apology, not even a text. He had done it. With full awareness, with his name in ink, he had taken everything. I cried so hard that night I thought my body would never stop shaking. I screamed into the pillow, not just from grief, but from the kind of heartbreak that only comes from being forgotten by the one you gave your soul to. I remembered his first steps, how he'd stumbled into my arms with a smile so wide it made me forget I hadn't eaten that day. I remembered staying up late to sew his Halloween costume, even though my fingers were blistered from cleaning toilets for 12 hours straight. I remembered the way he used to fall asleep holding my pinky finger, the only comfort that ever worked when he was sick. And now I was nothing but a shadow in the rearview mirror of his ambition. I tried to tell myself to move on, to let it go. That the house didn't matter, but it did. It mattered because it was our mother's. It was a place I had poured my own childhood into, where I used to sit with Liam by the window and tell him stories about who we came from. It was a monument to the life I built for him with bleeding hands and relentless hope. Still, I tried. I kept my head up at work. I smiled at neighbors. I told myself to be proud. He had a career now, a future. He was the successful man I raised him to be. But pride, I learned, tastes like ash when it sits on a foundation of betrayal. Then came the announcement. Posted on social media like a trophy. A glowing photo of him in front of the house, freshly renovated, a sleek sign on the lawn, Whitaker and Coer Design Studio, his architecture firm. He had turned our childhood into branding, into capital. The caption read, "Dreams built from scratch. First office, first big step." There wasn't a single word about me. Not a thank you. Not a mention of the girl who gave up her life to carry him on her back. Just smiles, bright futures, strangers cheering him on with likes and clapping emojis, calling him self-made. Self-made. I stared at the screen, heart pounding so loudly I couldn't hear anything else. My hands went numb, my lips parted to speak, but nothing came out. How could he? I didn't go to work the next day. I lay in bed, fully dressed, staring at the ceiling. My phone buzzed all morning. Friends tagging me, people asking if I'd seen. One message stood out from a woman I'd once worked with. "I always knew you were amazing." "You must be so proud of your brother." I wanted to scream. I wanted to shake them all and say, "Do you know what I gave up? Do you know what he took?" But pride kept my lips sealed. Pride or shame. I didn't want to be the bitter sister. I didn't want to be the woman who raised a man only for him to pretend she didn't exist. But the silence became a wound I couldn't stitch closed. I began avoiding the places that reminded me of him, the coffee shop we used to go to on weekends, the bookstore where he picked his first chapter book with such excitement, the park where I taught him to ride a bike on a summer evening so warm, it still clung to my memory like sun on skin. Every corner of the city whispered his name. Every quiet alley echoed the sound of his laughter. And now all of it had been repurposed into a past he had rewritten, one where I didn't exist. Weeks passed, then months. I didn't call. He didn't either. There was an ache in me that wasn't just emotional. It was physical, a raw hollowness in my chest that made it hard to breathe sometimes. I started waking up at 3 a.m. like clockwork, heart racing, palms sweaty, the image of him smiling beside that house burning into the back of my eyelids like a scar. I tried therapy. The woman was kind, soft-voiced. She asked questions like, "What would forgiveness look like for you? And do you think he understands the impact of his actions?" I didn't know how to answer, because I didn't know if I wanted to forgive him, because forgiveness felt like letting him win, and worse, like erasing myself the same way he had. One day, I passed the house. I didn't mean to. I took a wrong turn coming back from the grocery store, and there it was, looming at the end of the block like a dream turned nightmare. It had been gutted and rebuilt, the porch redone in sleek wood, the windows modern and cold. Our mother's rose bushes were gone. The old tire swing Liam had begged for at 6, ripped out. The shutters were no longer the faded blue we'd painted together one summer, but a rich, professional black. It didn't look like home anymore. I pulled over and sat there, engine idling. People passed by without glancing, unaware that the woman in the car was once a child who learned to be a mother in the rooms, now filled with blueprints and clients and interns in button-up shirts. I gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, as tears welled up again. Then the front door opened, and there he was. Liam stepped out wearing a crisp suit, talking to a man beside him who laughed loudly. My heart jumped at the sight of him, reflexive and angry. He didn't look around. He didn't see me. He didn't even pause to feel the weight of the history beneath his feet. I left before I could scream. That night, I finally opened the box. The one I'd kept sealed in the top of my closet for years. Inside were photos, letters, drawings he'd made me in crayon, a paper crown he gave me on Mother's Day when he was 7. It said, "Best Sister Mom." A rock he'd painted with, glitter and his initials because he said, "Everyone needs a lucky stone." My hands trembled as I ran my fingers over the memories. He had once adored me. He had once said I was his whole world. I stayed up till morning reading every scrap of the past I'd saved. The pain burned like a fever, but in the fire was something else too. Clarity. This wasn't just about a house. It wasn't just about inheritance. It was about being erased. It was about watching someone you gave your entire soul to pretend you were never there. The next day, I took a walk. A long one. No phone, Just air and my heartbeat and the whisper of the world moving on whether or not you're ready. When I got home, there was an envelope waiting on the doorstep. My name scrawled in handwriting I hadn't seen in months. Inside was a letter. I've been thinking about everything. I've been trying to justify it to myself, but the truth is I can't. You were right. You gave up everything for me. And I didn't just forget it. I erased it. I told myself it was my turn to have something for myself. But I see now that what I built was never mine alone. It was built from the nights you stayed awake, the meals you didn't eat, the choices you made before you ever got to live. I'm sorry. I don't even know if I deserve forgiveness, but I wanted you to know. I remember. All of it. And I'm ashamed. If you never want to speak to me again, I understand. But if there's even a chance, I want to fix this. I want to start again. I read it 3 times, each word sinking in slowly, like stones dropped into water. My hands were steady. My heart was not. And yet, something inside me shifted, not healed, not yet, but open. Just a crack. Because love, true love, the kind forged in sleepless nights and selfless acts, doesn't disappear. It gets buried sometimes, under pain, under pride, under the bitter rubble of betrayal. But maybe, just maybe, it can rise again. I didn't reply right away. I couldn't. I stared at the letter, fingers curled around the edge of the paper until it wrinkled like dried leaves, my breath caught between anger and aching. A part of me wanted to scream, "It's too late. You already chose." But another part, the one that had once hummed lullabies in the dark, still remembered the boy who used to slip his hand into mine when he was scared. I kept the letter beside my bed, rereading it in the quietest hours, when the world was still and my thoughts too loud to ignore. There were no excuses in his words, just remorse. And it wasn't perfect. It didn't erase what had happened. But it was something I had longed for more than I admitted. Not reparation, not even restitution. Just recognition. Just the simple truth spoken aloud. I remember. I know what you did for me. I was wrong. 2 weeks later, he called. I let it ring 3 times before answering. I didn't say hello, neither did he. We just breathed on opposite ends of years of silence. Then his voice broke through, low, careful. I miss you, sis. My throat tightened. I had imagined this moment so many ways, angry, triumphant, tearful, but all I managed to say was, "You hurt me. I know." His voice cracked. I've never been more sorry for anything in my life. There was a pause so long it felt like the stretch of years between us, filled with all the birthdays, holidays, milestones we should have shared. "I want to talk," he said finally. "Really talk, face to face, no lies, no deflection, just us." And somehow I said yes. We met at the same diner we used to go to when I scraped together enough for pancakes and hot chocolate. Tiny celebrations in between unpaid bills. He looked older, sharper, but his eyes still had that same searching warmth they had when he was a boy clinging to my hand. We sat down. He didn't touch his coffee. He barely looked at the menu. He looked at me. Just me. "I took from you," he said. "Not just the house. Not just the inheritance. I took the story of us and rewrote it like you didn't matter. I didn't even realize I was doing it. And when I did, I was too proud, too scared to stop." Tears welled in my eyes, but I didn't cry. Not yet. "I looked in the mirror one morning," he went on, voice thick, "and I didn't recognize the man looking back. Because I remembered being 8 years old and thinking you were a superhero. And now? I was the villain in your story." I finally spoke softly. "You became the man I raised, just not the one I hoped you'd be." His face crumpled. "Can I fix it? Even a little?" I stared out the window, watching a mother lift her child into a booster seat in a car parked across the street. My heart ached at how full and empty that image felt to me. "You can't undo what you did," I said, voice firm but not cruel. "But you can choose who you'll be from now on." We talked for hours, about our childhood, about our mother, about the tiny traditions I'd clung to just to give him something stable, about the house, the name on the deed, the future. He offered to sign half of it over to me, said it was never supposed to be his alone, said he finally understood that the foundation wasn't wood and brick, it was me. But I shook my head. "I don't want the house anymore," he blinked. "Why?" "Because I don't need it to prove what I did. I lived it. Every single day. I carry it in my bones. You took something from me, yes, but I won't let it define me." He reached across the table. His hand trembled. Mine did too. But I took it. Not because everything was okay, not because I forgave him completely, but because love, the real kind, the kind that carries someone on its back through fire, isn't clean. It's not neat or easy or cinematic. It's messy and cracked and stitched together with the strongest thread of all, choice. I chose him once. And maybe, tentatively, carefully, I could choose to let him back in. Over the next months, we talked more. Slowly, sometimes clumsily. He came over on Sundays and cooked me dinner. He brought old photos and apologized for every memory he'd forgotten to thank me for. We cried once watching a home movie. He held my hand so tightly it turned pale. And on my birthday, for the first time in years, he gave me a gift I hadn't expected, a framed drawing. One I didn't recognize. It was us. Him, small, beaming. Me, behind him, hands on his shoulders, drawn in soft, careful lines. Above it, a simple caption in his handwriting, "Built on love." And I cried. Because this time it wasn't from loss. It was from being seen, being remembered, being loved, finally, the way I always had loved him. Not for what I did, but for who I was.